Welcome to Quiet Battles, Loud Grace, where hidden wounds meet relentless grace. We have real conversations about faith, burnout, trauma, leadership, and what it means to be human. No fake perfection, no polished answers, just honest conversations and relentless grace. Because sometimes the people helping everyone else are the ones quietly struggling the most.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is Brent, and I am back again for another episode. Today is a little bit different. There are no guests. There are no interviews. It's just me talking. And I want to talk a little bit about emotional regulation. And I am the first to admit that I just want to start with the confession that this is probably not the greatest marketing strategy for a therapist, but I struggle with emotional regulation. I struggle to regulate my own emotions. A lot of that comes from childhood trauma. A lot of that comes from not being taught early on how to handle your emotions, that kind of thing. But there, I said it. I know the concepts. I know the neuroscience. I know the coping skills. I can talk about the nervous system and attachment and cognitive disorders and mindfulness and trauma responses and boundaries and breathing techniques. I can do all of that until I actually need a breathing technique, as does everyone else in the room, right? But I can still get emotionally hijacked because knowing how the nervous system works doesn't mean you stop having one. And that matters. Sometimes we can imagine that emotionally healthy people are calm all the time. They never get angry. They don't get anxious. They don't get overwhelmed. They wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and they journal and beside a candle with some incense burning, and they drink something green that tastes like lawn clippings, and then they peacefully accept whatever life throws at them. No, that is not emotional regulation. That is either Instagram or a hostage situation, okay? Emotional regulation is not the absence of emotion. It's the ability to experience an emotion without automatically becoming obedient to it. So that's what I want to talk about today. What does that actually mean to be regulated? What happens in the body and the brain when we become dysregulated? Why do some of us go from 0 to DEFCON 2 over something objectively small? Me, I'm the worst at that. And most importantly, let's talk about what we can do about it, what you can do about it, what I can do about it. I want to approach this clinically, scientifically, practically, spiritually, because human beings are not just brains walking around in genes. We have bodies, we have histories, we have relationships and values, we have wounds, we have meaning. And depending on what your beliefs are, you may also understand yourself as having a soul. So I want to talk about the whole person. First, let's talk about what emotional regulation actually means. It does not mean emotional suppression. Those are two very different things. Suppression says, I shouldn't feel this. Regulation says, I feel this and I'm deciding what to do next. Suppression says, don't be angry. Regulation says, I'm angry, but let me ask why. I'm going to have compassion and curiosity for myself. Let me figure out why I'm angry. What is the anger telling me? What response actually serves me best in this moment? Suppression says, quit being anxious. Regulation says, my nervous system is detecting danger. Is there actually danger here? Or am I safe? Is my alarm system responding to an old pattern? So that distinction is really, really important, and it's really, really, really big. So emotions are information. They are not always accurate, and they're not always truth. I tell clients all the time, feelings are not facts, but they are important information because fear can tell us something feels unsafe. Sadness can tell us that something that mattered has been lost. Anger tells us something feels unfair or threatening or violating or out of our control. Shame can tell us that we believe something about ourselves that's not acceptable. Guilt. Guilt can tell us that our behavior violated our values. Loneliness tells us we need connection, and none of those emotions are inherently bad. The problem begins when the emotion becomes the boss. The problem is when the anxiety says, "Hey, cancel everything and avoid this." And then you automatically obey, and that becomes dysregulation. So if shame says hide and you disappear from everybody who loves you, that may be dysregulation. Being regulated means I can hear the emotion without handing it the keys. The emotion can ride in the truck. It doesn't get to drive. And if you're from Texas, you understand that giving the wrong person the keys to the truck can become a legal problem very quickly. So let's talk about the science that happens when life gets hijacked. Let's get a little bit clinical. Your brain, my brain, is constantly evaluating the environment for safety and threat. And much of that process happens before conscious thought. The amygdala and the related limbic structures help detect emotionally important information, especially potential threat. Your autonomic nervous system helps prepare your body to respond, especially those of us with some trauma in our background. Our amygdala and limbic system is usually hyperactive. It's in what we call hyperarousal most of the time. Our heart rate changes, our breathing changes, our muscles tense up, our attention narrows, stress hormones and neurotransmitters shift, and your body starts preparing to fight, flee, or freeze, or protect itself. And meanwhile, that prefrontal cortex, this front part of the brain, the last part of the brain to develop, by the way, it doesn't develop until we're in our mid-20s. That is the part of the brain that's heavily involved in planning and inhibition and judgment and flexible thinking and considering consequences. So you basically temporarily become dumber. I temporarily become dumber. Clinically speaking, of course, you've probably experienced this. You're in an argument and suddenly you have constructed a flawless 12-count indictment against somebody you supposedly love. I do this all the time. You're bringing up something from 2017. You've got exhibits and witnesses, and somehow you've subpoenaed their mother. And 20 minutes later, your nervous system settles down and you think, well, I may have overreacted. That may have been a little much. That's the difference between reacting from activation and responding from regulation. Again, chief guilty person right here. And this is why telling a dysregulated person to calm down has approximately the same effectiveness as telling a tornado to respect property lines. The nervous system often needs help returning to a state where reflection is possible. I want to talk to a little bit about the window of tolerance. One useful clinical idea is what we call the window of tolerance. Think of it as a range of emotional arousal where you can still function reasonably well. Inside your window of tolerance, you can feel stressed and still think clearly. You can feel angry and still choose your words. You can feel hurt and remain kind of interested or curious. You can disagree with somebody without immediately deciding that they're evil or dead to you. When we move beyond that window of tolerance, we might become hyper-aroused. That can look like anxiety or panic or rage or agitation, racing thoughts, hypervigilance, impulsivity, or the urgent need to do something right now. That's me. I need to do it right now. Below the window of tolerance, we may move toward hypoarousal. That might be numbness or shutdown or dissociation or exhaustion or emotional flatness, helplessness, withdrawal. Both of these can be signs of dysregulation. Some people explode, some people disappear. I'm going to say that again. Some people explode, some people disappear. Some people do both, which is relatively efficient if your goal is to make relationships as confusing as possible, right? Our windows are not all the same size. Sleep deprivation can shrink your window. Stress can shrink your window. Trauma can shrink your window. Hunger, alcohol, and substances, all of these things can affect your window of tolerance. Relationship conflict can affect your window of tolerance. Pain, and sometimes just a Tuesday can apparently affect it. especially if you're a small business owner. So this is one reason that emotional regulation cannot be reduced down to just positive thinking. Sometimes the brain needs cognitive work. Sometimes the body needs physiological regulation. Sometimes the relationship needs repair, or your life genuinely needs to change. You can't deep breathe your way out of every bad situation. And sometimes anxiety is distorted. Sometimes anxiety is correctly informing you that your life has become unsustainable, and wisdom is figuring out the difference. Anxiety can either be distorted or it can be telling you something about your life being unsustainable. This is where it gets a little personal for me. I struggle with emotional regulation. There are moments when I feel myself becoming activated and part of my brain knows exactly what's happening. I can practically narrate it clinically. Interesting. My sympathetic nervous system appears to be activated. Meanwhile, another part of me is thinking, yeah, that's awesome, but you should probably say something completely devastating to your wife or your children because you have to defend yourself. That gap between what I know and what I feel is super humbling. And I think as therapists, counselors, pastors, physicians, leaders, parents, anybody in a helping role, we can fall into that trap of believing we should somehow graduate from being human. We don't. Knowledge gives us tools. Practice gives us capacity, but neither give us immunity. I'm going to say that again, louder for those in the back. Knowledge gives tools. Practice gives capacity, but neither give immunity. One more time. Knowledge gives tools. Practice gives capacity, but neither give immunity. For me, emotional regulation sometimes means recognizing that my first interpretation is not necessarily the truth. And I'm horrible at this. So often I do this in hindsight. My poor children and wife. It means recognizing that intensity is not evidence. Just because I feel something strongly doesn't mean my conclusion is correct. That sentence could save me a lot of trouble. It could save you a lot of trouble. Intensity is not evidence. I can feel deeply rejected without actually being rejected, as hard as it is for me to admit that. I can feel disrespected without the other person intending disrespect. I can feel abandoned because something in the present touched something from the past, and I can feel certain but still be wrong. That's not weakness. That's psychological maturity. Being able to hold to the reality of my emotion and the possibility that my interpretation might be wrong. So here's what I have to do. And I have to do this constantly all the time. You may need to do this. Step 1, name what is happening. So how do we regulate better? The first skill is surprisingly simple, almost insultingly simple. You just name the emotion. Not I'm upset, but get very specific. I'm embarrassed. I'm threatened. I'm disappointed. I'm jealous. I'm scared. I'm ashamed. I'm lonely. I'm resentful. I'm overwhelmed. I'm grieving. Name the emotion. Put language to an emotion because that experience can help create psychological distance from it. Instead of I am angry, try saying I notice anger in me. That sounds like a tiny little logistic trick or a linguistic trick, but it can actually change the relationship we have with our emotions. I am angry can turn the emotion into identity. I'm noticing anger turns it into an experience. Again, I am the worst at this. I fully acknowledge to my wife and kids. But you are not the emotion. I am not the emotion. You are the person experiencing the emotion. And that is super important clinically. And I think it's spiritually profound because whatever your spiritual beliefs, your spiritual tradition, there is something powerful about remembering that your internal experiences are real without being the totality of who you are. One more time. There is something powerful about remembering that our internal experiences are real, but they're not the totality of who we are. A thought can visit without becoming scripture. An emotion can speak without becoming God. Step 2, we're going to regulate our bodies before arguing with our brains. When activation is high, we start with the body. We've got to slow our breathing, close our eyes, slow down our breathing. Not because breathing is magical, not because every mental health podcast has legally required you required to tell you to breathe. No. But slow breathing can influence autonomic arousal. Try making the exhale just a little longer and slower than the inhale. Unclench your jaw, rub your jaw. Put your feet on the floor. Notice what you can see and hear and physically feel. If you can, walk, change your environment, splash cool water on your face, eat if you haven't eaten, sleep before making a life-changing decision if you're exhausted. There is an important principle here. State before story. State before story. Before you decide what everything means, check the physiological state from where you're interpreting it. Because an activated nervous system is not a great screenwriter. It takes a delayed text message and writes a 3-act tragedy. They haven't answered. Act 1, they're angry. Act 2, they never cared. Act 3, I will die alone, surrounded by unopened Amazon packages, right? Or maybe they're in the shower. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe they're just in the shower. So state the story. State before story. Step 3, we want to create space between feeling and action. The third step, you create a delay between the emotion and the behavior. You don't have to respond immediately. I'm the worst about this. I feel like I have to respond right then. We do not. This is one of the most adult sentences in the English language that we can make. I need a little more time before I respond. That's regulation. That's not avoidance, assuming you actually come back and complete the conversation. I can say, hey, I'm getting activated. I'm too activated to have this conversation. Well, give me 20 minutes and let's come back. That's different from storming out and disappearing for 3 days, which I have been known to do. A pause has a return time. A timeout has a return time. Avoidance has a witness protection program, right? There's a difference. The goal is not to escape the discomfort. The goal is to reduce arousal enough that your values can re-enter the room, re-enter your brain. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I want to do about it? What will happen if I do it? What response will I respect for myself tomorrow? And then this last question, that again, what response will I respect tomorrow? That is because tonight's anger has ideas that tomorrow's character will not appreciate. Tonight's anger has ideas. Tomorrow's character has consequences. Okay, step 4, we're going to check the story. We're going to examine our interpretation of what's going on. This is where cognitive therapy becomes pretty important and useful. We want to ask, objectively, what happened? What meaning did I assign to it? What evidence supports that meaning? What evidence does not support that meaning? Are there other possible explanations? Am I mind reading? Am I catastrophizing? Am I treating a feeling as a fact? Am I treating a feeling as proof? Am I turning one event into an always and forever or an always and never? Suppose somebody doesn't invite you to a party or something. Fact, I was not invited. Interpretation, nobody wants me around. Those are not the same sentence. Suppose your partner, your wife, your husband is quiet. Fact, they are quiet. Interpretation, they are angry with me. Well, maybe. Or maybe they're just tired or distracted or thinking about work or wondering why they bought 12 avocados at Costco, or who knows. I mean, regulation gives us enough space to investigate before prosecuting. Again, chief offender. Number 5, identify the need without demanding that others read your mind. Ask what you need. Emotions often point toward needs. I'll tell couples this all the time. The thing is never the thing. The argument is never really about the thing. It's about the thing under the thing. Maybe I need reassurance. Maybe I need rest. Maybe I need a boundary. Maybe I need a connection or to apologize, or maybe I need somebody else to take responsibility. Maybe I need to grieve something instead of fixing it, or tolerate something I can't control. If that's true, then I need to learn to communicate it clearly. One of the cruel little realities of adulthood is that people are often terrible at reading our minds. I realize that it's inconsiderate, right? They should know what we're thinking. We think if they really cared, they would know. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes if they really care, you still have to use nouns and verbs. I feel hurt when that happened. I need some reassurance. I need us to talk about this. I can't continue this conversation while we're yelling. I need some time and I will come back. That is emotional regulation in relationship. So now I want to move to the spiritual side. I'm not going to pretend everybody listening has the same theology or background because I know we don't. But most spiritual traditions wrestle with some version of the same question. And that is this: what do I do with the chaos inside me? For me, spiritual regulation is not necessarily pretending that I'm peaceful. It's bringing the truth of what I'm feeling into the presence of God. Prayer can become a form of honest attention. Silence can become a place where we stop performing. Meditation can teach us that thoughts arrive and leave. Confession can help us take responsibility without shame. Forgiveness can free us from organizing our whole identity around an injury. Community can regulate us because human beings are profoundly relational creatures, and surrender, when properly understood, isn't passivity. It's recognizing the border between what I can control and what I cannot control. I can control whether I tell the truth. I cannot control whether somebody likes it. I can control whether I set a boundary. I cannot control whether someone else is offended by it. I can control whether I apologize. I cannot force forgiveness. I can control my behavior. I cannot control every emotion that shows up. That is freedom, not total control, but appropriate control. There's a line between responsibility and omnipotence. I am not omnipotent. And some of us keep crossing it like we own both sides of that property. Here's an important point. Being regulated does not mean being nice all the time. You can be regulated and angry. You can be regulated and firm. You can be regulated and say no or end a relationship. You can be regulated and end a relationship. You can be regulated and confront somebody. You can be regulated and leave. The difference is that your behavior is intentional rather than reactive or impulsive. Sometimes the healthiest regulated response is, nope, that is not acceptable. Calm does not mean compliant. Peace does not require passivity. Boundaries aren't emotional violence simply because somebody doesn't like getting them, like receiving the boundary. At the same time, calling something a boundary does not magically make it healthy behavior either. I'm setting a boundary that you are never allowed to disagree with me. That is not a boundary. That's dictatorship with therapy vocabulary, right? That's saying you're not allowed to disagree with me, not a boundary. If yelling starts, I'm going to end this conversation and return when we're both calm. That's a boundary. So we'll talk a little bit about co-regulation and why people matter. We also need humans, other people in our lives that can help us regulate. A calm voice can matter. A safe touch, that can matter. Eye contact matters. Being listened to matters. A trustworthy person can help regulate our nervous system. And this begins early in life. Children borrow regulation from their caregivers before they can consistently regulate themselves. And adults still do versions of this. It's why one safe person can change the emotional temperature of a room. Have you ever noticed that? It's also why some relationships leave you chronically activated. So pay attention to that. Not every uncomfortable relationship is toxic. And sometimes people can challenge us because we need challenging. But if we're constantly being smaller or more afraid or more confused or hypervigilant or less like ourselves around somebody, that determines some serious examination, because our nervous system is not an infallible lie detector, but it shouldn't be ignored either. So what does this actually look like? So here's what I am practicing, and I mean practicing because I am not good at it. I have not mastered this at all. Even this week, I was emotionally dysregulated. That's why I'm doing this podcast, to remind myself of these things. But here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to notice myself when I get activated and I'm trying to do these things. I name it. I slow down my body. I delay unnecessary action. I question the story, identify the need, and I choose the response based on my own values. When I fail, which happens often, I repair. That last one is probably the most important. Regulation doesn't mean you never lose your temper. It means you become more and more able to recognize it, interrupt it, and repair the damage when you don't interrupt it in time, which is me quite often, right? I was defensive. I spoke disrespectfully. I shut down. I assumed something that wasn't fair. I'm sorry. As we start to wrap up a little bit, I want to just talk about when self-regulation isn't enough. There are also times when emotional dysregulation is so persistent or intense or connected to trauma or anxiety disorders or mood disorders, ADHD, substance use, personality patterns, chronic stress, grief, etc. In those situations, try harder is not really a great treatment plan. That's when therapy can help. Sometimes medication evaluation is needed. Skills-based approaches are needed. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help people examine patterns of thoughts and behaviors. Dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, is particularly well known for concrete skill involving emotion regulation and distress tolerance and mindfulness and interpersonal effectiveness, things like that. Trauma-focused treatment, which is what I do a lot of, that and CBT. But trauma-focused treatment can help when the nervous system is responding to experiences or situations that it might not have fully integrated. And sometimes the work is not learning how to tolerate more. It's more recognizing that you have tolerated too much. And that's an important distinction that we make in therapy. Mental health treatment should not turn people into more effective victims of unhealthy environments. Regulation should actually increase your capacity to respond well and to leave what's causing you harm. All right, let's wrap it up. So, what does it mean to be emotionally regulated? It means I can feel without immediately reacting. I can experience anger without becoming cruel. I can experience fear without automatically running. I can experience sadness without deciding I will always feel this way. I can experience shame without accepting the verdict that I am worthless. I can be triggered without making everybody around me pay for wounds they didn't create. And when somebody does hurt me, which will happen, I can respond with clarity rather than chaos. I am still working on this, people. Believe me. I think I probably always will be. And actually, I think that's okay. My goal is not to become a person who never gets dysregulated. Neither should your goal be that. The goal is to notice sooner and recover faster. Understand ourselves more honestly, repair more quickly, and make fewer permanent decisions from temporary emotional states. Maybe emotional maturity is not becoming unshakable. Maybe it's learning to do what we're supposed to do when we are shaken. Learning how to return to our body, to reality, to our values, to the people we love, to God, and ultimately to ourselves, because our emotions deserve to be heard, but they do not deserve to be unquestioned authority figures in our lives. We need to feel them and learn from them. And again, preaching to the choir here, I am the one who needs to learn. I am the most guilty. If you need a little bit of extra help, the Backstage Project is here to help. We offer free support for people who have been in ministry or artists or creatives. Just when your life implodes and you lose your insurance or you lose your support system or you lose your family and friends, we're here to help. At the time when you're most vulnerable and you need the most help, so many people walk away and we're walking toward you. Reach out to us at thebackstageproject.org. You can email me at brent@thebackstageproject.org. If you're not in ministry or a creative, reach out to us at Renewing Hope, renewinghope.net. We take most major insurances and we'd love to help you. We'd love to help you learn to regulate your emotions as I'm learning to regulate my emotions. All right, guys, if you're enjoying the podcast, give us a like, give us a shout out, follow us, repost, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Quiet Battles, Loud Grace. Quiet Battles is sponsored by the Backstage Project, a nonprofit organization providing hope, support, and resources for ministry leaders, creatives, and others navigating life's difficult seasons. To learn more, get involved, or support the mission, visit thebackstageproject.org. Until then, may you find strength for today's battle and grace for tomorrow's.